When I was at university, somebody had graffitied over one of the toilet rolls. Politics degrees. Please take one. Now, over the years, that's continued to resonate with me because what's commonly called politics on the TV news or in the newspapers, well, that version of politics far too often is just one politician shouting at another about how one party never has any of the good ideas. It's competitive rather than constructive. And that competitive noise is covering the fact that not enough of the right things are getting done and too many of the wrong things are getting done. It's noise and distraction and power in too few hands, and far too often, control just for the sake of control. Now, I don't blame the elected politicians for this. The central control of political parties causes just as many problems for them as it does for us. Different problems, but still problems. And I don't blame the political parties for it either. They're just being very good at their job. And in the absence of us paying proper attention, they've become very, very good at their jobs. But that's party politics. Politics, on the other hand, is actually really important and really interesting. It's described as the art of the possible. Now, that just means doing as much as you can with what you've got. Even the richest country has limits and needs to make choices. And politics is about, or should be about, making the right choices for everyone. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, a lot of reading, a lot of speaking to lots of clever people about why we're getting too many of the wrong things and not enough of the right things. And I'd like to share with you some ideas about why things aren't working the way they're supposed to and where we might be able to tweak things to make things work a whole lot better for everyone, elected politicians included. Now, the aim of government is to keep the people safe. That means making the right choices about defense, but also about health, about education, but also about the environment. But in order to make government work properly, we need 6 big things. We need to have good representation. We need to have good checking, good scrutiny of what's going on. We need to have proper choices being made about what are called the wicked issues, the difficult problems. We need to have good, competent administration. We need to have good, clear information and facts upon which we all agree. We can disagree what to do about the facts, but we shouldn't be disagreeing about what the facts are. And we need to have all the best ideas. Now, today, we're just going to look at the first 3 of those things. And shock announcement, we're going to be dealing with them from the perspective of the UK, because I'm from the UK, and people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. We have enough problems of our own before we start looking at other countries. But although the details might be slightly different in other places, the general principles here apply in the United States or Australia or France or almost anywhere. So, if our governments aren't working properly, what can we do about it? Well, let's start at the top. We need to have good representation. Our electoral system is based on a first-past-the-post system. Now, that means that it's the politician who gets more votes than anybody else, but not the politician who gets most of the votes. Well, that's the politician who gets elected. In 2019, 213 of our MPs, that's 1/3 of the total, got less than 50% of the votes in their constituencies. That means 1/3 of our elected members of parliament had more people vote against them than for them. At the national level, first past the post means that it's the political party which gets most of the elected MPs, not the political party which wins the national vote. Well, that's the party which gets to form the government. Did you know we haven't had a political party in the UK which has won the national vote since 1935? And on top of that, our political parties are really good at controlling their MPs when they do get elected. Now, you put all of that together, and what you've got is governments which tend to be elected with a minority of the national vote, with strong control over Parliament, and not much need to consult to make changes. And that all means that our elected representatives, well, they're not really very representative of us at all. Now, a better system would be one where we represented the different proportions of opinions across the country. Unsurprisingly, that's called proportional representation, or PR. Now, PR is the most popular form of democracy across the world. It's used in more than 100 countries around the world. That's twice as many, more than twice as many as use first past the post, including some of the most successful and stable societies in the world. It turns out that proportional representation is better on a whole range of different measures. It's not perfect, but it's a whole lot closer to perfect than first past the post. In the 2019 election in the UK, this was the number of MPs who were returned based on a first past the post system. But if we had had a system of proportional representation, we would have had a more balanced, more representative set of MPs in the House of Commons. Now, how would this actually work in practice? Well, here in beautiful Lincolnshire, where I live, we have 7 constituencies. Across the county, one party gets about 67% of the vote. But under first past the post, that party gets all 7 of the MPs. That means that 33%, a third of the people in Lincolnshire, are not represented by anybody they voted for. Under a proportional representation system, at least 2 of those MPs would be from other parties. So this would make our political parties less strong. It would make them less able to form a majority in Parliament immediately. It would mean that they would have to consult with other parties. It would mean that they'd have to work with other parties in order to form a government or in order to work just on particular issues. But it would also make them less headstrong, less likely to rush in to making big mistakes. Now, that's a good thing, because having to consult, having to check up with all the people who know about a subject, having to build consensus, having to speak to all the people who would be affected by making a decision, and therefore being less likely to rush in to making big blunders, that would be a good thing. Because even worse than our first past the post system of representation, well, did you know that the parts of Parliament that are supposed to be checking up on the government, they're controlled by the same political party which is in government? We need to have good scrutiny of what's going on. In the UK, there's a system of scrutiny committees which check up on changes and laws that the government is proposing. The government is formed from the political party which has a majority of MPs in Parliament. But then the scrutiny committees are set up with the same proportion of MPs as the MPs in the whole of Parliament, which means that each scrutiny committee is dominated by the same political party as is in government. How much actual scrutiny do you think is being done by a junior MP who one day would like to be a minister? It's a little bit like the refereeing being done by people from the substitutes bench of the home team. Ideas don't get properly checked through. That all means that stuff can get done, but not necessarily the right thing. Having to build consensus, again, to speak to all the people who know about a subject, having to talk to all the people who'd be affected by changes you might make, and to find out in advance all the things that could go wrong, that's a good way not just of making sure that people understand and agree, but of making sure that you get it right first time. However, there are lots of what are called blunders which have been committed by governments of all political parties. Now, these blunders have been hugely costly to us as taxpayers. They've cost billions to us as taxpayers, but they've also caused incredible hardship to individuals who've been caught on the wrong side of them, hardship and heartache. Crucially, they're called blunders because these are mistakes which not just could have been avoided, but should have been avoided. Everyone, apart from the ministers pushing them through, agreed even before they were pushed through, that they were wrong, flawed, misconceived. But our centrally powerful, headstrong governments didn't need to listen. They just went straight ahead and did it anyway, and got it wrong anyway. So what can we do about this? Well, there's a lot of detail behind this, but briefly, we could have a system of citizen scrutiny. People selected randomly, a little bit like jury service, properly trained and paid, but nothing to gain by nodding through legislation. Their future careers don't depend on it. And finally, we need to be dealing with the wicked issues. The wicked issues are those issues which are difficult problems, problems which elected politicians don't want to deal with because they're a little bit afraid they might get voted out. For example, they might be concerned about the short-term pain of banning old polluting cars from driving into city centres, even though, deep down, none of us actually thinks that car pollution is a good thing. Well, the way to deal with that is a thing called a citizens' assembly. A citizens' assembly is 50 or 100 people from all over the country geographically, but also all over the country in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, education, jobs, genuinely a micro version that represents all of us. And those 100 people are brought together. They're given training in how to address difficult problems. They receive input from all of the experts in a particular subject, the subject that they're looking at. They receive representation from all of the interest groups who really care about that subject. They gather all of the information together. They think together, they talk together, they work together. And the whole process is transparent, public, ideally broadcast to everybody. Not just so that people like you and me can also learn about the subject, but perhaps more importantly, so that we can be reassured that all of the issues are being taken into account. And then those 100 people, they make a decision about that subject. And that decision is one which our governments can act upon. There's no postponing it, no putting it on the back burner, no ignoring it. This process has been used very successfully in countries all over the world, including Republic of Ireland, Iceland, Canada, and many, many others. And there's no problem for our MPs in putting the decision into practice. After all, they're just sensibly implementing the decision of the Citizens' Assembly. So that's it. Our governments aren't working properly. The focus on centralized control by political parties which aren't really that representative of us means that too many of the wrong things are getting rushed in without proper thought and preparation, and too many of the important things are getting ignored or sidelined. But if we work together, we can fix it. We can have representation which would be part of ensuring a consultative, properly thought through process of decision-making, proportional representation. We can have a scrutiny function which is checking that mistakes, big blunders, are not being made by our governments, citizen scrutiny. And we can have a process which is looking at making sure that all of the important long-term stuff is being properly addressed with citizens' assemblies. Now, importantly, that brings extra responsibility to bear on us. We need to pay proper attention. That way, we would get MPs who would respond to our real needs rather than merely to our worst prejudices. Now, what does that leave for elected politicians? Well, there's still a role for setting the agenda, for standing up for political principles, for representing the needs and challenges of their constituents. Perhaps in due course, we wouldn't need quite so many of them, but they could focus on doing those things that elected politicians and political parties are ideally placed to achieve, and leave the rest to us. Thank you.